My guest for the hour says this. He says the year 2016 will go down in history as a watershed moment for globalists in their pursuit of the New World Order or the One World System. Britain's surprise decision to pull out of the EU has shaken up the trending status quo of European unity in royal fashion. It appears that none of the global elites saw this coming, or if they did, they viewed it only as a remote possibility. My guest says this definitely messes up their plans in spite of their heavy-handed political tactics to convince the UK to remain in the EU. The people of Britain have spoken. They are tired of European globalist bureaucrats dictating their every move. They want their sovereignty back. We're going to talk about that for the hour. Remember, the Bible talks clearly about a coming one world system. Eric Barger is in studio with me. Eric, you've looked at all of these notes. Your thoughts?
We got a lot to cover in a short period of time, but it's all important stuff. I think it's really important that some of our allies, or people who we might somehow perceive as allies, are speaking out against Brexit and against what's happened in Great Britain. But very interesting what's happening right now, and I think we need to see these things through biblical view rather than just who we might see as an ally or a conservative here in the world itself.
Well, joining me for the hour is the familiar voice of Gary Kah, who has been monitoring the rush to global government for many decades now, 25 years, if not more. Gary Kah, welcome back to the program.
It's good to be with you, Jan and Eric. Thanks for having me on.
Gary, you say that the globalists will not allow England to unravel their one world plans. This whole separation process could take anywhere from 1 to 3 years, actually. But let's go back to your statement that the globalists will not allow England to unravel their one world plans. What do you think the globalists are going to do?
Well, the reason why they can't afford for that to happen is Europe was to be the model for the rest of the world, a regional economic trading bloc that would then become a political union. And the Club of Rome back in the late 60s and early 70s, and then later the Bilderberg Group, they really envisioned a global government system based upon a number of regions, and Europe would be the beginning of that. And then eventually NAFTA and other regional trading blocs as well. And so if they allow Britain to slip away quietly and successfully, that would send a signal to other countries that they can do the same thing. And there's been talk in the Netherlands, for example, about taking their sovereignty back, and some other countries. And so I think in some fashion, they're going to do what they can to make it difficult without appearing that they are doing so intentionally. And they can act on an economic front by making it somewhat difficult for Britain to renegotiate trade deals now, which they will have to do individually with all of the different countries in the EU rather than as an entire bloc. Also coming into question will be military alliances, and it will be equally difficult on the EU right now, or challenging, I should say, because Britain arguably has been the strongest military component, of all the EU countries. France would be a close second. Germany has the potential of being very powerful, but with U.S. military bases there still, that has kind of kept Germany's military in check, so to speak. So this has major ramifications all the way around.
Well, Gary, but the thing that I think is driving this, and, correct me if I'm wrong here, but there are people in Europe, in several countries, and obviously Great Britain is seeing the handwriting on the wall. They're terrified of the whole immigration issue.
That is a big part of it as well. I believe that tipped the scales in the case of Britain, and they have a very large Islamic community. I believe there are more Pakistanis living in London than anywhere else in the world outside of Pakistan. Most of them have been fairly peaceful up to this point in time, but there are cells that are operating, and it's actually been somewhat surprising that not more has happened in Britain. France has been kind of the target, it appears, over the last year, but the Brits feel that what is happening in France could also begin happening there in Britain, and they want to feel in control of their own destiny and take whatever steps they feel they need to keep all of this in check.
But you told me off air, Gary Kah, that you were actually shocked when Britain successfully parted from the EU.
Yes, I was. I saw the trend that more and more people were moving toward national sovereignty, but all the polls, even a month before, showed that the pro-EU people would win. And I think perhaps that caused some of the EU backers to rest comfortably thinking they've won the battle, and then they had a big surprise. The people toward the end, any final decisions that were made during the last week or so before the vote were trending heavily in favor of Brexit, of Britain's exit out of the EU. And so this really shakes things up. I am surprised. I thought it might be close, but I personally didn't think that the Brits would vote in favor of it. It's not totally a done deal yet.
Yep, you're right.
If the vote were to be held again right now, if only 2 percentage points swing in the opposite direction, it could all be undone. And so this is a possibility, although some of the politicians have said, no, we're not going to vote on it again. But depending what happens in the world, who can rule out that another referendum will be held sometime in the next year or 18 months. So we need to keep that in our minds on the back burner.
They're as divided, I believe, over there as we are here politically on that particular issue, on the issue of their sovereignty, of who they are as a nation. And, when you look at it, we're not that far removed from the time of World War II and the nationalism that really swept not only Europe, but was here in the United States, being proud of the flag and proud of who we are and the fact that we defeated Tojo and Hitler. And you think of that, we still have some of those folks around, and there's still some of that thinking. So who knows? But I had heard the same thing about the Netherlands. I was in the Caribbean recently and talking to people who are underneath their rule, and they're saying the same thing, that a lot of people are talking about taking back the country and getting out from underneath the rule of what the euro was all about, for example.
Gary, you said something to me the other day, and I want to dwell on this for just a minute or two. And folks, you are listening to Understanding the Times Radio. I'm Jan Markell. I'm talking for the hour with Gary Kah. He's monitored the rush to the one world system for a lot of years. You can learn more at GaryKah.org. That's spelled K-A-H, GaryKah.org. I'll say a little bit more about his newsletter in just a moment. But Gary, you suggested that perhaps some kind of turmoil will actually bring these countries together again. Instability in Europe will cause Europe to come back together and fight a common enemy. Why don't you share some thoughts on that? Because what could be the instability? What, a Mideast war or what? What are you thinking?
The two areas where greatest manipulation can occur, it has to do with the economy and also any type of military crisis. And when you look at everything happening in the Middle East and how it's spilling over into Europe now, if there were to be a larger crisis that would lead Europe into some type of war involving the Middle East, that could have the effect of keeping Britain close to the mainland and all of the players cooperating together on that front. And also any military action would also probably affect the economy in a pretty major way. And so we don't know what kind of fallout there will be there. So it's not completely over yet when we see Britain moving out, because until it's done, which could take 2 to 3 years, anything could happen. With what is taking place in Turkey with Erdogan, the attempted coup actually backfired, and now he's getting rid of any opposition, anybody who he has any doubts about in the military. And by the time all of this is said and done, he's going to be more like a dictator than someone elected in a democracy. And you add to that the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood now has its main hub in Turkey.
Yes.
They moved out of Egypt a few years ago. And so Turkey is drifting more and more toward radical Islam and away from the West. And that's huge. And this has gone quite rapidly. You also have Russia now that may have a clear shot into the Middle East. They're already very active in Syria again. They always maintain some presence in Syria, but they have stepped that up now. You have the U.S. also in Syria. The Russians and the Americans have had some close brushes just in the last few weeks with Russian MiGs flying very close to U.S. bases and aircraft. And so it's a very tense situation that can change very quickly, especially if there are powers that want it to change and that want to provoke some type of a crisis. Israel also has been provoked in the last couple of weeks with military maneuvers taking place by Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and radical Islamic elements in southwestern Syria, close to the Golan Heights region, and that hasn't been widely reported in the news, but it is the case. And so it's hard for me to believe that we're going to go the next 3 years without the current ISIS crisis enlarging in the Middle East, unless the Lord does a miracle and something drastic happens. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But all of these things will also have an impact on European unity and the direction of it.